Well, it's finally here, the EOS R5. We've been waiting for it for quite a while now. It's got 8K internal RAW, 45 megapixels, 4K 120 frames per second at 10-bit, IBIS up to 8 stops. But do we actually need it? The answer's not no. Obviously I haven't got one of these in hand, but as a creator I feel like I need to give my opinion on whether the R5 or R6 are tempting me over from Sony and what they mean for the industry. By the way, please do comment down below to let me know what your opinion is on these two cameras. I'm really interested to see what people's opinions are and let me know what camera you've already got so I know where you're coming from with this. Let's talk for a second about what all the hype is about. Us mirrorless video shooters have been sport for choice at the moment when it comes to 1080p, but when it comes to 4K, we're pretty limited and 4K is definitely the next big thing. So on the EOS R we had the 1.7 times crop, on the Sony it's stuck at 30 frames per second, and Panasonic's been pushing the bar with its 60 frames per second 4K, but you're limited to the crop sensor and you're limited with the autofocus capabilities of the Panasonic cameras. So what most of us video shooters wanted is 4K at 60 frames per second, hopefully with that 10-bit format, so that we could slow down the 4K footage and we could grade it without worrying about it falling apart. And obviously as a full frame shooter, me shooting on the A7 III personally, I wanted that 4K to be in full frame as well. And Canon is actually the first of its kind to do 4K in full frame at more than 60 frames per second with great autofocus. And Canon have actually pushed this bar further by offering 8K recording internally in RAW, which is absolutely insane specs for a small mirrorless camera, and perhaps more exciting is the 4K 120 frames per second in 10-bit 422. And the reason that's more exciting is that 8K is definitely a spec for the sake of having a spec. I definitely see me making more use out of the 4K 120 frames per second than I would do of the 8K, and I've seen lots of people say pretty much the same thing. The 8K is definitely a spec they've just put on the camera to make it look good. But all of these specs in a camera that's so small with the great autofocus capabilities makes this an amazing camera. And obviously you have to be wary that there's not been that many tests on it yet. We already know about the overheating issues and there's not been a whole load of reviews yet, so we do have to wait and see, but the camera's looking good so far. Okay, so this is nitpicking a bit, but the R5 does not have 4K in RAW. If you want to shoot in RAW, you do have to shoot in 8K, which is a shame because I think most people would have rather seen 4K in RAW than any 8K capabilities whatsoever, but that is just a thing. And also you're still stuck with that 30-minute recording limit, but at this point I think it's more down to the heat than anything else. They want to keep the heat low by keeping the recording limit there. Other than that, and without actually diving into the camera, I don't actually see that many more negatives to this camera. The only thing is that huge price tag, which is kind of justified for the specs and the research this must have taken to get this far. But that brings me to the R6. So most people that I've spoken to have said that the R6 is definitely the value proposition. It's like an R5, but you miss out on that 8K and that 4K 120 frames per second. But you still have full frame 4K 60 with that dual pixel AF, which is really, really nice to have. There's also a gain in low light with a lower megapixel count and a higher maximum ISO. So maybe the R6 is actually where it's at. No 10-bit is definitely a shame, but it's something that is not a deal breaker for me, especially at this price range. But at least with the R6 you can afford some lenses with it, and that's kind of a big thing when you're investing in a new system. And that brings me to the next topic, which is the gap in the market that I believe is there right now, that Sony or another camera brand can slip right into. I'm doing this section because I'm a Sony user and I want to give my perspective on this, and obviously we're all waiting for that Sony a7S III, so what do we think they're going to offer? For me personally, if they produce like an a7 III with 4K 60, even at 8-bit, with that autofocus video tracking capabilities that the a7 R4 has, I'd buy it personally. I'll obviously be gutted that there wasn't 10-bit, but that's something that is kind of the minimum that they could do right now for me to buy the new camera. But what I think they need to do right now to slot in that gap is 4K 60 frames, 10-bit 422 with that autofocus tracking in video, and that would put it perfectly somewhere in between the R6 and the R5, which I think is sort of the sweet spot. And obviously they'd have to price it that way for it to make sense, but I think this is where Sony could really fit in. So 4K 60 10-bit 422 on the A7S III, and then they could put 4K 120 frames in 8-bit on the A7S III as well, and then in the A7 IV they'd have 4K 60 with 8-bit, and that would make it a compelling option for startup videographers too. So for someone who's still got their 600D or A7 II or A7S II and is looking to invest in a new camera, I'd definitely recommend the R6 to most people, providing reviewers don't find anything bad with it. It's definitely going to be a great all-rounder, and I think it could be the A7 III of its time. Kind of a jack of all trades, master of none situation, but the A7 III has definitely been the most versatile camera for the last couple of years. For me personally, as a Sony shooter who's invested lots in Sony cameras and Sony lenses, I think I'm going to wait to the end of the year. It's obvious that something is coming, and as long as they can even get close to somewhere near what the R5 has to offer, and like I say, somewhere between the R6 and the R5, that's a camera I would definitely buy. And it would definitely make me happy that I waited instead of switching straight over to the Canon system. Having said that though, it's the best thing that Canon have done in ages. I think they're absolutely doing bits right now. These cameras are definitely innovating, and it's the best thing, the sort of best announcement we've seen since the Sony A7 III back in the day. It's definitely making 2020 a bit more exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's ahead. Does gear really matter? Who cares? This is your hobby, maybe your job, maybe both. And so if you want to get excited about the latest gear and always go out and buy the latest greatest, then why shouldn't you? You're able to do that. Just don't let it dictate your ability. So that's it from me. Do let me know down below in the comments. Are you going to be investing in an R6 or R5? What do you have right now? Or are you going to wait for maybe another announcement from a different camera company? Just let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down twice. And if you want to see more videos like this, then hit that subscribe button. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.